Relive a summer of 1965. Pool at the club, ice cream man in the square, music on the jukebox, and the school dance at night. The first thing Michael Thompson heard every morning was the gentle hum of his mother's Westinghouse radio drifting up from the kitchen below, carrying the familiar voice of WLS Chicago's morning DJ, spinning another Motown classic. Good morning, Chicago. It's 7:30 on this beautiful Tuesday, June 15th, 1965, and here's the Supremes with Back in My Arms Again to get your day started right. Michael stretched in his twin bed, sunlight filtering through the white cotton curtains his mother had sewn last spring. The familiar sounds of Millfield awakening filled his ears. Mr. Henderson next door starting his Buick Skylark, the distant whistle of the 7:45 freight train carrying grain to Chicago, and somewhere down Maple Street, the rhythmic thwack of Johnny Kowalski delivering the morning edition of the Millfield Herald. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of percolated coffee and his mother's famous buttermilk pancakes. Margaret Thompson stood at the yellow Formica counter, her auburn hair perfectly set despite the early hour. Wearing a floral house dress and pearl earrings, even for breakfast, Margaret Thompson maintained the standards befitting a doctor's wife. "Morning, Mum," Michael said, sliding into his usual chair at the dinette table. The morning newspaper lay folded beside his orange juice glass, its headlines speaking of distant troubles. President Johnson increases troop presence in Vietnam and civil rights workers continue Mississippi voter registration. "Good morning, sweetheart. Your father's already at the office. Mrs. Patterson went into labor around 5. Margaret placed a stack of golden pancakes before him, the butter melting into perfect pools of yellow. "Don't forget you're helping Father Mackenzie with the church bulletin after breakfast." "Yes, ma'am." Michael poured Aunt Jemima's syrup over his pancakes, listening to Sam Cooke's Wonderful World play from the radio perched on the kitchen windowsill. Outside, the Thompson family's backyard stretched toward the alley, where Mrs. O'Malley was already hanging laundry on the line, white sheets dancing in the gentle breeze like ghosts of summer mornings past. "Michael," his mother said, refilling her coffee cup from the electric percolator, "the Donnellys are having their annual barbecue this Saturday. I told Eleanor we'd bring potato salad. Will the whole parish be there?" "Most everyone. It's always such a lovely time." Margaret sat across from him, smoothing her dress. "I saw Claire Donovan at the grocery store yesterday. Such a sweet girl, though terribly quiet. Her mother says she spends most of her time reading at the library." Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Claire Donovan. He'd known her since elementary school, of course. Millfield High had only 247 students total, but she'd always been one of those peripheral figures, present but not quite part of the social fabric that included the popular kids, like Richard Collins and his circle. "She's in my English class," Michael said carefully. Margaret sipped her coffee. Her family's had such a hard time since Mr. Donovan hurt his back at the plant. "I do hope Claire finds a nice young man to settle down with after graduation, though I suppose she'll need to work for a while first." The radio crackled slightly as DJ Larry Lujak introduced the next song. "Here's a new one from those British boys everyone's talking about. The Rolling Stones with I Can't Get No Satisfaction." After breakfast, Michael walked the 6 blocks to St. Mary's Catholic Church, his sneakers scuffing against the sidewalk cracks where dandelions pushed through the concrete. Millfield in summer was a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. White clapboard houses with wraparound porches, American flags hanging limp in the still air, and the sound of push mowers as men in undershirts tended their quarter-acre kingdoms. Father Mackenzie, a thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, was waiting in the church office, surrounded by stacks of mimeograph paper and the church's ancient duplicating machine. "Good morning, Michael. Ready to help spread the word of the Lord?" "Yes, Father." They worked in comfortable silence for an hour, the purple ink from the mimeograph machine staining their fingers as they collated bulletins for Sunday's service. Through the office window, Michael could see the church cemetery where generations of Millfield families rested under weathered limestone headstones, their stories carved in dates and brief inscriptions. "Beloved wife and mother, at rest in the Lord, gone but not forgotten." "Father," Michael said as they stacked the finished bulletins, "do you think it's wrong for people to want something different than what their parents wanted?" Father Mackenzie looked up from his work, considering the question with the gravity he brought to all matters of the soul. "What sort of different, my boy?" "I don't know, just different. Like maybe God has different plans for us than what everyone expects. God works in mysterious ways, Michael. Sometimes his plans for us are different than our own plans, and sometimes they're different than our parents' plans. The important thing is to pray for guidance and listen with an open heart. The priest's smile was gentle. Is there something specific troubling you? No, Father, just wondering. But as Michael walked home through the tree-lined streets, he found himself thinking about Claire Donovan and the way she'd looked during Sister Mary Catherine's discussion of Romeo and Juliet last semester. Not bored like most of the class, but engaged, her green eyes bright with interest as she took notes in that careful, precise handwriting of hers. The Millfield Municipal Pool opened at noon sharp every day, and by 12:15, the familiar rhythm of summer had established itself. Mothers in flowered bathing suits watching toddlers splash in the kiddie pool, teenagers clustered around the diving board showing off for each other, and the lifeguards, bronzed college students home for the summer, ruling over their aquatic kingdom with whistles and Ray-Ban sunglasses. Michael spread his towel on a lounge chair near the concession stand where Mrs. Petrosky sold ice-cold Coca-Colas for 15 cents and bags of Fritos for a dime. The pool area buzzed with conversation and the occasional shriek of delight as someone was pushed into the deep end. "Thompson, over here!" Michael looked up to see Richard Collins waving from the diving board area, surrounded by his usual entourage. Tommy Morrison, whose father owned the hardware store, Danny Kowalski, the pitcher for the high school team, and Susan Matthews and Janet Peterson, two of the most popular girls in their class. Michael walked over, feeling the familiar mixture of acceptance and awkwardness that came with being on the periphery of Richard's social circle. He was welcomed, certainly, but he was also aware that his inclusion was somewhat conditional, based on his family's status in the community rather than any particular charm or athletic ability on his part. "Did you hear about the dance at the pavilion Saturday night?" Susan asked, adjusting her red polka dot bikini. "They're bringing in a real DJ from Rockford. He's got all the latest records." "My parents are chaperoning," Janet groaned. "It's going to be so embarrassing." "At least they're not making speeches about proper behavior like Father Mackenzie did at the spring formal," Tommy laughed. Richard executed a perfect jackknife dive, emerging from the water with his hair slicked back like a young Paul Newman. "You coming to the dance, Mike?" "Probably." "Good. I'm thinking about asking Claire Donovan. What do you think?" Michael felt something twist in his stomach. "Claire?" "Yeah, you know, quiet little Claire. She's actually pretty cute when she's not hiding behind those books all the time. Might be fun to bring her out of her shell." "I don't know if she's really your type," Michael said carefully. "What's my type?" Richard's tone was playful, but there was an edge to it. "You know, someone more outgoing." "Maybe that's the point. Besides, her older brother Johnny was telling me she's actually pretty smart. Might be interesting." Michael felt the sun beating down on his shoulders, but suddenly the afternoon seemed less golden, less perfect. Around them, the sounds of summer continued. Children laughing, the lifeguard's whistle, someone's transistor radio playing "Help" by the Beatles. But something had shifted. That evening, after dinner and family television time, they'd watched the Andy Griffith Show and the news with Walter Cronkite. Michael found himself walking downtown, past the shuttered storefronts and the single traffic light that blinked yellow after 9 p.m. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of crickets, punctuated by the distant rumble of teenagers, drag racing out on County Road 47. The Millfield Public Library stayed open until 9 on weekdays, and as Michael approached the brick building with its tall windows glowing warm yellow in the darkness, he could see a single figure moving among the stacks inside. He pushed through the heavy wooden door, breathing in the familiar smell of books and floor wax. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, looked up from her desk with a smile. "Michael Thompson, what brings you here so late?" "Just looking for something to read, Mrs. Henderson." "Well, you've got about 10 minutes before I lock up. The summer reading section is right over there." But Michael wasn't interested in the summer reading display. Instead, he found himself walking toward the back of the library, where the quiet alcove held the reference materials and study tables. And there, just as he'd somehow known she would be, sat Claire Donovan. She was bent over a composition notebook, writing intently with a blue Bic pen. Her light brown hair fell across her face like a curtain, and she'd tucked one strand behind her ear in a gesture that seemed both unconscious and graceful. She wore a simple yellow sundress and white sandals, and there was something about her concentration, her complete absorption in whatever she was writing, that made Michael hesitate. "Claire?" She looked up, startled, her green eyes wide. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire quickly closed her notebook and gathered her things. "Hi, Michael. What are you writing?" A flush crept up her neck. "Just stories. It's nothing important." "I bet it is important." The words came out before he could stop them, more sincere than he'd intended. She paused in her packing, looking at him with curious eyes. "What makes you say that?" "I remember your essay on The Great Gatsby. Sister Mary Catherine read parts of it to the class. It was really good." "You remember that?" "Sure. You said something about how Gatsby was really about the death of the American dream, but also about how people keep hoping anyway. I thought that was pretty smart." Claire's smile was small but genuine. "Thank you. So what kind of stories do you write?" "All kinds. Sometimes about people here in town, sometimes about places I've never been. I want to be a journalist someday. Maybe work for a big newspaper in Chicago or New York." "That sounds amazing. My parents think it's silly. They say I should focus on finding a good husband and settling down." She gathered her books against her chest. "What about you? What do you want to do after graduation?" "I'm not sure. My dad wants me to go to Northwestern and study medicine, follow in his footsteps. But sometimes I wonder if that's really what I want or just what's expected." "Mrs. Henderson, I'm locking up now," came the librarian's voice from the front desk. "We should go," Claire said. They walked out together into the warm evening air. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light along Main Street, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "Can I walk you home?" Michael asked. "All right." They walked slowly, their footsteps echoing off the empty storefronts. Peterson's Five and Dime, Murphy's Luncheonette, its neon sign dark for the night, Millfield Hardware, and the Rexall drugstore where teenagers gathered after school to share sodas and gossip. "Do you ever feel like everyone has your whole life planned out for you?" Claire asked as they turned onto Elm Street, where the houses grew smaller and the lawns less manicured. "All the time. Sometimes I sit by my bedroom window at night and listen to the trains going through town, and I wonder where they're going, what it would be like to just get on one and see where it takes you. That sounds lonely. Maybe, but it also sounds free." They stopped in front of a small white house with a sagging front porch and a postage stamp lawn. A single light glowed in the front window, and Michael could hear the faint sound of a television through the walls. "This is me," Claire said. "Claire?" "Yes? Would you like to go to Murphy's for a Coke sometime? Maybe tomorrow." Her smile was like sunrise. "I'd like that very much." "Great. How about after lunch?" "Around 2. "Perfect." Michael watched her climb the front steps, her hand trailing along the wooden railing. She paused at the door and turned back. "Michael, thanks for asking about my writing. Most people think it's weird. I don't think it's weird at all. I think it's brave." Murphy's Luncheonette occupied the corner of Main and 2nd Streets, its red and white checked linoleum floors and red vinyl booths unchanged since the Eisenhower administration. The jukebox in the corner was a 1959 Wurlitzer that played everything from Frank Sinatra to the Four Tops for a nickel, and the grill behind the lunch counter sizzled constantly with hamburgers, grilled cheese sandwiches, and Murphy's famous chili dogs. Michael arrived 5 minutes early, sliding into a booth near the window where he could watch for Claire. The afternoon crowd was typical for a Wednesday. A few construction workers from the highway project sharing coffee and pie, Mrs. Kowalski treating her 3 youngest to ice cream sundaes, and old Mr. Peterson reading the Chicago Tribune while nursing a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. The jukebox was playing Under the Boardwalk by the Drifters when Claire walked through the door, looking around uncertainly until she spotted Michael. She'd changed from the yellow sundress into white capri pants and a blue sleeveless blouse, and she carried a small purse that looked like it had belonged to her mother. "Hi," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hi yourself. Thanks for coming." Murphy himself, a large Irish man with perpetually rolled-up sleeves, approached their table with 2 glasses of ice water and a friendly smile. "Well, if it isn't young Thompson. And Miss Donovan. How's your mother doing, dear?" "She's fine, Mr. Murphy, thank you for asking." "What can I get you two? The usual chocolate shake, Michael." "Actually, I think I'll have a Coke today. Claire?" "A cherry Coke, please." Coming right up. When Murphy disappeared behind the counter, Claire looked around the restaurant with curious eyes. I don't think I've been here since I was little. My mom used to bring me for ice cream after doctor appointments. Your dad never brought you? A shadow crossed her face. Dad doesn't go out much since his accident. The back injury. It's been hard on him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's okay. She traced patterns on the table with her finger. He was a different person before. Used to take Johnny and me fishing at Willow Creek. Taught us to play catch in the backyard. Now he mostly sits in his chair and watches television. Murphy returned with their cokes, the glasses sweating in the afternoon heat. Claire took a sip of hers and smiled at the sweet cherry flavor. So tell me about these stories you write, Michael said. You really want to know? Absolutely. Claire's eyes lit up. Well, I've been working on this series about different people in town. Like I wrote one about Mrs. Patterson. You know, the older woman who lives alone in that big house on Sycamore Street? Everyone thinks she's strange because she keeps to herself, but I imagine she has this whole rich inner life, full of memories and dreams that nobody knows about. That's really cool. Have you shown them to anyone? Just Mrs. Henderson at the library. She's been encouraging me to submit some to the school literary magazine next year. The jukebox clicked and whirred, and suddenly the Beach Boys' California Girls filled the air. Claire's foot began tapping unconsciously to the beat. Do you like this song? Michael asked. I love the Beach Boys. Sometimes I lie in bed at night listening to WLS on my transistor radio, and when they play Surf Rider or Fun Fun Fun, I close my eyes and try to imagine what California must be like. All that sunshine and freedom. You've never been to California? I've never been anywhere. The farthest I've traveled is Chicago, and that was just once, for my cousin's wedding. She stirred her Coke with her straw. What about you? We went to Colorado last summer. My dad had a medical conference in Denver and we drove up into the mountains. It was incredible. All those peaks stretching as far as you could see. Made me feel really small, but in a good way. I'd love to see mountains and the ocean. I want to see everything. Maybe you will, when you're a famous journalist. Claire laughed, but there was something wistful in it. My parents keep hinting that I should think about secretarial school instead of college. Something practical, they say. Something that will help you find a good husband. What do you think? I think I'd rather die than spend my life typing other people's words instead of writing my own. The intensity in her voice surprised him. Here was a side of Claire Donovan he'd never seen before, passionate, determined, fierce in her quiet way. Then don't, he said simply. Don't what? Don't let them talk you into secretarial school. If you want to be a journalist, be a journalist. It's not that simple. Why not? Claire was quiet for a long moment, watching the condensation drip down the side of her glass. Because girls like me don't get to chase impossible dreams. We get practical jobs and marry practical boys and have practical lives in practical little towns. Who says? Everyone. Society. Our parents. The guidance counselor who told me I should be realistic about my options. Even Father Mackenzie, in his own sweet way, talks about how a woman's highest calling is motherhood. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe. She looked up at him with those green eyes. But it's scary to hope for something everyone tells you is impossible. The jukebox had moved on to You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin' by the Righteous Brothers, and the afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Around them, the familiar sounds of Murphy's continued. The sizzle of the grill, the clink of silverware against plates, the murmur of conversation. Claire? Would you like to go to the dance at the pavilion Saturday night? With me? She looked startled. Really? Really? But won't Richard Collins be there? And all the popular kids? Probably, but I'm not asking Richard Collins to dance. I'm asking you. Her smile was radiant. Yes, I'd love to go with you. They finished their cokes and walked out into the afternoon heat, the sounds of Main Street washing over them. Cars passing, the distant whistle of the grain elevator, children playing in front yards. As they reached the corner where their paths would diverge, Claire touched his arm. Michael. Yeah? Thank you for listening, really listening. Most people just wait for their turn to talk. Thank you for trusting me with your stories. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek quickly, then hurried away down 2nd Street, leaving Michael standing on the corner with the scent of her perfume. something light and flowery like the lilacs that grew behind his house, lingering in the air. By Thursday evening, word of Michael's invitation to Claire had spread through Millfield's teenage social network with the efficiency of a small-town telephone exchange. Susan Matthews called Janet Peterson, who told her boyfriend Tommy Morrison, who mentioned it to Richard Collins at baseball practice. Michael was helping his father organize medical files in the office when Dr. Thompson looked up from his stack of patient charts. "I hear you've asked the Donovan girl to the dance Saturday." "Yes, sir. She seems like a nice young lady. Quiet, but that's not necessarily a bad thing." Dr. Thompson returned to his filing. "Her father came to see me last week about his back. Terrible situation. That injury at the plant has really affected the whole family." "How so?" "Well, Tom Donovan was always a proud man, hard worker, provided well for his family. Now he can barely get out of bed some days. That kind of thing takes a toll on a man's spirit, not just his body." "Is he going to be okay?" "Physically, probably. It's the other healing that takes longer." Michael thought about what Claire had said about her father, about how different he'd become. It made him admire her even more. Here was a girl dealing with real hardship, yet still dreaming of something bigger. Friday afternoon brought the weekly baseball practice, where Michael served as equipment manager for the Millfield Wildcats. The team practiced at the field behind the high school, a patch of grass that had been lovingly maintained by generations of boosters and volunteer fathers. Richard was in top form, his fastball popping into the catcher's mitt with satisfying regularity. As team captain and the best player in the county, he commanded respect and attention from his teammates, coaches, and the handful of girls who came to watch practice. "Looking good, Collins," called Coach Martinez, the Spanish teacher who'd taken over the team when the previous coach retired. "State championships don't win themselves." During a water break, Richard approached Michael at the equipment bench. "So, Thompson, I hear you beat me to Claire Donovan." "What do you mean?" "The dance. I was planning to ask her myself. I didn't know that." "Well, now you do." Richard took a long drink from his water bottle, his blue eyes never leaving Michael's face. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. I asked her. She said yes." "That's interesting, because I think you might be making a mistake." "How's that?" "Claire's not really your type, is she? I mean, you're the doctor's son. You could have your pick of girls. Susan Matthews, Janet Peterson, any of the popular crowd. Why settle for some bookworm from the wrong side of town?" Michael felt heat rise in his chest. "Claire's a great girl. I'm sure she is. But think about it practically. Your parents have expectations for you, don't they? About college, your future, the kind of girl you should be serious about. This is just a dance, Richard. Is it? Because the way I heard it, you two were looking pretty cozy at Murphy's the other day." Richard's smile was friendly, but his eyes were cold. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm trying to be a friend. Claire Donovan is pretty enough, sure, but she's not exactly Millfield High royalty. You might want to think about what people will say." "I don't care what people say." "No? Well, maybe you should, because after high school, we're all going to be judged by the company we keep, and some company looks better than others." Practice resumed, but Michael found it hard to concentrate on his equipment duties. Richard's words echoed in his mind, not because he agreed with them, but because he recognized the kernel of truth in them. His parents, his community, did have expectations about his future, and those expectations included the kind of girl he would date, marry, build a life with. That evening, the Thompson family gathered around their Zenith television to watch the Dean Martin Show. Margaret Thompson worked on her needlepoint while Dr. Thompson read the evening edition of the Chicago Tribune, occasionally commenting on the news. "Says here President Johnson is considering another troop increase in Vietnam," he said, folding the paper. "That boy from the Patterson family, what's his name, the older son? He'll be 18 soon, might find himself drafted." "Oh, Robert, don't talk about such things," Margaret said, without looking up from her stitching. "It's too depressing. The world's changing, Margaret, whether we talk about it or not." During a commercial break, Margaret set down her needlepoint. "Michael, dear, I ran into Eleanor Collins at the grocery store today. She mentioned that Richard was disappointed about the dance Saturday. Apparently, he'd hoped to ask Claire Donovan himself. That's too bad for Richard. She also mentioned that Claire's family is having some financial difficulties, with her father's injury and all." "What's your point, Mom?" No point, really. Just that it's important to be sensitive to other people's situations. Sometimes what seems like kindness to us might feel like charity to them. Michael looked at his parents, his father buried in his newspaper, his mother returning to her needlepoint as Dean Martin crooned to a studio audience, and felt a familiar frustration. Everything in their world was so carefully ordered, so predictable. There was a proper way to do things, proper people to associate with, a proper path from high school to college to career to marriage to the next generation of proper children. But what if he wanted something different? What if he wanted to write poetry instead of prescriptions? What if he wanted to travel the world instead of staying in Millfield? What if he wanted to fall in love with a girl who wrote stories and dreamed of newspaper bylines instead of junior league meetings? "I'm going for a walk," he announced, standing up during another commercial break. "Don't be out too late, dear," his mother said absently. The summer evening was thick with humidity and the sound of air conditioners humming in windows. Michael walked aimlessly through the familiar streets of his childhood, past the houses where his classmates lived, past the church where he'd been baptized and confirmed, past the school where he'd spent 12 years learning to color inside the lines. He found himself on Elm Street, standing across from Claire's house. The living room window glowed warmly, and he could see shadows moving behind the thin curtains. For a moment, he considered crossing the street, knocking on the door, asking if Claire wanted to sit on the porch and talk, but instead he turned around and walked home, Richard Collins' words still echoing in his ears. "You might want to think about what people will say." Saturday evening arrived with the kind of golden light that made everything in Millfield look like a postcard from a gentler America. The municipal pavilion, built in the 1920s and lovingly maintained by the Parks Department, sat at the center of Riverside Park, its white gazebo structure surrounded by oak trees strung with colored lights that would twinkle like stars once darkness fell. Michael spent longer than usual getting ready, trying on 3 different shirts before settling on a blue Oxford cloth button-down that his mother had pressed that morning. He splashed on a bit of his father's Old Spice cologne and combed his hair until it stayed perfectly in place, held by a generous application of Brill cream. The Donovan house looked different when he walked up to the front door at 7:30 sharp. Someone had swept the front porch, and there were fresh flowers, peonies from the backyard garden, in a mason jar on the porch railing. When he knocked, Claire's mother answered the door. Patricia Donovan was a thin woman who looked older than her 42 years, her brown hair streaked with premature gray, and her hands rough from taking in laundry to help make ends meet. But her smile was warm and genuine as she welcomed Michael inside. "You must be Michael. Claire's told me so much about you. Please come in." The living room was small but immaculately clean, with a plaid sofa and matching chair arranged around a coffee table, topped with issues of Good Housekeeping and the Current Reader's Digest. An old RCA television sat in the corner, its rabbit ears wrapped with aluminum foil for better reception. Family photographs covered the mantelpiece. Claire and her older brother Johnny at various ages, Patricia and Tom's wedding picture from 1943, Tom in his army uniform before shipping out to the Pacific. "Claire will be down in just a moment," Patricia said. "She's been getting ready for hours." From the back of the house, Michael could hear the low murmur of a television and a man's voice. Claire's father, he assumed, though he didn't appear to greet the visitor. The absence felt deliberate, loaded with the kind of small-town social dynamics that everyone understood, but no one discussed. Then Claire appeared at the top of the stairs, and Michael forgot about everything else. She wore a white dress with small blue flowers, its full skirt perfect for dancing, and white sandals that made soft sounds on the wooden steps as she descended. Her hair was styled in a way he'd never seen before, swept up on the sides and secured with small pearl barrettes, with the rest falling in soft waves to her shoulders. She'd applied a touch of lipstick and just enough makeup to enhance her natural prettiness without hiding it. "You look beautiful," Michael said, meaning it completely. Claire's cheeks flushed pink. "Thank you. You look very handsome." "I made some sandwiches for later," Patricia said, holding out a small paper bag. "In case you get hungry." "Mom will probably get something at the dance," Claire protested, but she took the bag anyway. "You have a good time, and remember what we talked about," Patricia said, giving her daughter a meaningful look. "Yes, ma'am." They walked through the warm evening air toward the park, Claire's skirt swishing softly as she moved. The closer they got to the pavilion, the more they could hear the music. A real DJ from Rockford, just as Susan Matthews had promised, with a sound system that filled the park with the opening notes of "The Way You Look Tonight." "Are you nervous?" Michael asked as they approached the gathering crowd. "Terrified," Claire admitted. "I've never been to a real dance before. What if I don't know how to act around all the popular kids? Just be yourself. That's what I like about you." The pavilion was transformed into a teenage wonderland. Paper lanterns in pastel colors hung from the rafters, casting romantic shadows over the dance floor. Tables covered with white tablecloths held punch bowls and plates of cookies donated by various mothers, and the DJ, a young man with perfectly coiffed hair and a skinny black tie, presided over his array of records and sound equipment like a high priest of rock and roll. The usual social hierarchies of Millfield High were on full display. The popular kids clustered near the DJ station, the athletes and cheerleaders holding court at the best tables, the quieter students gathered in small groups around the periphery. It was a microcosm of the adult world they were preparing to enter, complete with unspoken rules about who belonged where. "Thompson! Claire!" Susan Matthews waved them over to where she sat with Janet Peterson and their dates. "You two look so cute together." They joined the group, Michael pulling out Claire's chair with a gallantry his mother had drilled into him since childhood. The conversation flowed around typical teenage topics: who was dating whom, summer vacation plans, speculation about college. But Michael noticed how Claire participated thoughtfully, asking questions and listening more than she spoke. "So, Claire," Janet said during a lull in the conversation, "I heard you want to be a writer or something." "A journalist, actually." "That's so interesting, like Lois Lane." Claire smiled. "Something like that, I hope. But you'd have to move to a big city for that, wouldn't you? I can't imagine living anywhere but here. I mean, Millfield has everything you need. Good families, nice neighborhoods, the church. Why would anyone want to leave?" Before Claire could answer, the DJ's voice boomed over the sound system. "All right, young lovers, here's a slow one for you. Grab that special someone and let's hear The Temptations with My Girl." "Want to dance?" Michael asked, extending his hand. Claire nodded, and they moved onto the dance floor, along with a dozen other couples. Michael had learned to dance in the Thompson family living room, his mother patiently teaching him to lead, while Frank Sinatra albums played on the hi-fi. But dancing with Claire felt completely different, more natural, more electric, more real. She fit perfectly in his arms, her hand light on his shoulder, her fingers interlaced with his as they swayed to David Ruffin's smooth vocals. Around them, other couples moved to the same rhythm. Tommy Morrison and Janet Peterson, Danny Kowalski with Susan Matthews' younger sister, even some of the chaperones, including Claire's English teacher, Miss Rodriguez, dancing with their spouses or boyfriends. "This is nice," Claire said softly, her breath warm against his ear. "Very nice." "Michael." "Yeah? Thank you for asking me. I know you could have invited anyone." "I asked who I wanted to ask." They danced through My Girl and stayed on the floor for the next song, The Beach Boys' Don't Worry Baby. The colored lights cast shifting patterns across Claire's face, and Michael found himself memorizing every detail. The way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled, the small scar on her chin from a childhood fall, the way she unconsciously bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on the steps. "You're a good dancer," she said as the song ended. "My mom made me practice with her every Sunday after dinner for 2 months, Michael admitted, making Claire laugh. They returned to their table just as Richard Collins approached with his date, Beverly Henderson, the librarian's niece visiting from Springfield for the summer. Beverly was conventionally pretty with blonde hair and a bright smile, but Michael noticed how she kept glancing around as if cataloging who was watching her with the most popular boy in school. "Mind if we join you?" Richard asked, though he was already pulling out chairs. "Of course," Susan said eagerly. "Beverly, that dress is absolutely gorgeous. Thank you, my mother bought it at Marshall Fields in Chicago." The conversation shifted to fashion and shopping, topics that seemed to make Claire increasingly quiet. Michael watched her retreat into herself, becoming the observer rather than the participant, and he felt a familiar protectiveness rise in his chest. "Hey," he said quietly, leaning toward her. "Want to get some punch?" At the refreshment table, they ladled pink punch into paper cups and selected cookies from the array of homemade offerings. Mrs. Collins, Richard's mother, was manning the table, her perfectly styled hair and pearls marking her as one of Millfield's social leaders. "Michael, dear, how nice to see you, and Claire, what a pretty dress." "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. Your mother must be so proud. I heard you're quite the student." There was something in Eleanor Collins's tone that made the compliment feel less than genuine, a subtle emphasis that suggested Claire's academic achievements were noteworthy, precisely because they were unexpected from someone of her social station. "Claire's the smartest person in our English class," Michael said firmly. "How wonderful. And what are your plans after graduation, dear?" "I'd like to study journalism in college." "Oh," Mrs. Collins's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that's, ambitious. Of course, college is so expensive these days, I'm sure you'll find something suitable." The dismissal was polite, but unmistakable, and Michael saw Claire's cheeks flush with embarrassment. Before he could respond, the DJ's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a special request here tonight. This one goes out to all the young lovers from a certain someone who shall remain nameless. Here's Percy Sledge with When a Man Loves a Woman." The opening notes of the soulful ballad filled the pavilion, and couples began moving toward the dance floor. Richard appeared beside them, extending his hand toward Claire. "Care to dance, Miss Donovan?" Claire looked at Michael uncertainly. Social protocol dictated that she should accept. It was considered rude to refuse a dance request at a public event, but Michael could see she didn't want to leave his side. "Go ahead," Michael said quietly, though every instinct told him not to let her go. Richard led Claire onto the dance floor, and Michael found himself standing alone at the refreshment table, watching them sway to Percy Sledge's passionate vocals. Richard was taller than Michael, more traditionally handsome, and he danced with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Quite a couple, aren't they?" Beverly Henderson appeared beside him, her own cup of punch in hand. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know, Richard and Claire. They look good together. Like they fit, if you know what I mean." Michael watched Richard lean down to whisper something in Claire's ear, saw her polite smile in response. But even from across the dance floor, he could read the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself slightly away from Richard's embrace. "I think Claire's perfectly happy with her current dance partner when she gets back," Michael said carefully. Beverly's laugh was bright and empty. "Oh, Michael, you're sweet, but let's be realistic. Richard Collins could have any girl he wants. And eventually, girls like Claire learn to want what's best for them." The song seemed to last forever, but finally it ended, and Claire walked back to their table with Richard following close behind. Her smile looked strained, and she avoided Michael's eyes as she sat down. "That was lovely," Richard said, his hand lingering on the back of Claire's chair. "We should do it again sometime." "Perhaps," Claire said politely. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and conversation, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. Richard remained close to their group, his attention focused on Claire with an intensity that made Michael increasingly uncomfortable. When the DJ announced the last dance, the Righteous Brothers' Unchained Melody, Richard was on his feet before Michael could react. "Claire, one more dance?" This time Claire looked directly at Michael. "Actually, I promised this one to my date." The rejection was polite but firm, and Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Maybe next time." Michael took Claire's hand and led her onto the dance floor for the final song of the evening. The pavilion was bathed in soft-colored light, and the romantic melody filled the summer air as couples swayed together in the gathering darkness. "Are you okay?" Michael asked quietly. "I'm fine. Just tired." "What did Richard say to you during that slow dance?" Claire was quiet for a moment, her fingers tightening slightly in his. "He asked if I'd like to go to the movies next weekend. When I told him I was busy, he said it was a shame I was wasting my time with someone who couldn't offer me the kind of future I deserved." Michael felt anger rise in his chest. "He said that? It's okay, Michael. I know what kind of person he is." "And what kind of person am I?" Claire looked up at him, her green eyes serious in the lamplight. "You're the kind of person who asks about my stories, who listens when I talk about my dreams instead of telling me why they're impossible, who makes me feel like I matter." As the song ended and couples began to disperse, Michael walked Claire home through the quiet streets of Millfield. The porch light was on at her house, and they could see her mother's silhouette in the living room window waiting up. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Claire said as they stood at the bottom of the porch steps. "Even with Richard bothering you?" "Especially despite Richard bothering me." She stepped closer, and for a moment Michael thought she might kiss him. Instead, she reached up and straightened his collar, a gesture so intimate and domestic that it took his breath away. "Michael." "Yeah? Whatever happens this summer, I want you to know that tonight mattered to me a lot." Before he could respond, she hurried up the steps and into the house, leaving him standing alone under the streetlight with the sound of night crickets and the distant rumble of the late train to Chicago. As he walked home through the familiar streets, Michael replayed the evening in his mind. Claire's laughter during dinner, the way she felt in his arms during the slow dances, Richard's calculated intrusion into their happiness, and finally, Claire's words on the porch, "Whatever happens this summer." Something was building toward a confrontation. He could feel it. The delicate social ecosystem of Millfield was too small to sustain the kind of tension that had developed between him and Richard, and Claire was caught in the middle whether she wanted to be or not. But as he let himself into the quiet Thompson house and climbed the stairs to his room, Michael realized something else. For the first time in his 17 years, he was prepared to fight for something, or someone, he truly wanted, regardless of the consequences. The summer of 1965 was only half over, and already it had changed everything. The following Monday brought oppressive heat that seemed to press down on Millfield like a heavy blanket, the kind of weather that made tempers short and small disagreements into major conflicts. Michael spent the morning helping his father at the clinic, but his mind kept wandering to Claire and the way Richard had looked at her during the dance. Around noon, he decided to stop by the library on his way home for lunch. The building's thick brick walls and high ceilings provided refuge from the heat, and he found Claire in her usual spot at the back study table, working on what appeared to be a letter. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to disturb other patrons. "Oh, hi." She quickly folded the paper she'd been writing on. "I didn't expect to see you here. Just wanted to say thanks again for Saturday night. I had a really good time." "So did I." Her smile was warm but distracted. "Michael, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you think I'm being foolish? About wanting to be a journalist, I mean." "What brought this on?" Claire glanced around the library, then leaned closer. "Richard Collins stopped by my house yesterday afternoon. He wanted to talk." Michael felt his stomach tighten. "About what?" "About my future. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation at the dance, and he wanted to help me be more realistic about my options. He knows someone at Northwestern who could get me into their secretarial program. Full scholarship, he said." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't interested. But then he said something that's been bothering me ever since." "What?" "He said that sometimes when people care about you, they have to tell you hard truths. That my family's financial situation meant I couldn't afford to chase impossible dreams, and that I should focus on practical skills that would help me find security." Michael studied her face, seeing the doubt that Richard's words had planted. "Do you believe him?" "I don't want to. But what if he's right? What if I'm just kidding myself about being good enough to work for a real newspaper?" "Claire." Michael reached across the table and took her hand. "Remember that essay about the Great Gatsby that Sister Mary Catherine read to the class? You wrote something I've never forgotten, that the real tragedy wasn't that Gatsby failed to get Daisy, but that he stopped believing in his own dream. Don't let Richard Collins turn you into a tragedy." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I believe in you, and because I know Richard Collins well enough to recognize manipulation when I see it." "Manipulation?" "Think about it. He could have just asked you out directly. Heaven knows he's confident enough. Instead, he's trying to position himself as your protector, the one who knows what's best for you. It's a power play." Claire was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she unfolded the paper she'd been working on. "I was writing a letter to Northwestern's journalism school, requesting information about their program and admission requirements." "That's great." "I haven't sent it yet. I keep thinking about what my parents will say, what the town will think if I actually try to leave Millfield." "What do you think?" "I think I'm scared, but I also think I'll regret it forever if I don't at least try." They were interrupted by Mrs. Henderson approaching their table. "I'm sorry to bother you two, but Claire, there's a young man here asking for you." Michael looked toward the library entrance, and saw Richard Collins standing near the circulation desk, still wearing his Millfield Wildcats baseball uniform, his cleats slung over his shoulder. He'd obviously come directly from practice. "Tell him I'll be right there," Claire said, gathering her things. "You don't have to go," Michael said quietly. "Yes, I do. If I'm going to stand up to him, I need to do it myself." Michael watched Claire walk toward the front of the library, her spine straight with determination. Through the tall windows, he could see Richard's animated gestures as he talked, his body language aggressive despite his smile. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but Michael could see the exact moment when Claire's polite attention turned to anger. Her voice rose slightly, not enough to disturb other patrons, but enough for Michael to hear her say, "That's enough, Richard. I've made my position clear." She turned and walked back toward Michael's table, but Richard followed, his own voice carrying across the library. "Claire, wait. You're making a mistake." "No," Claire said, turning to face him near the reference section. "I'm making a choice. There's a difference." "Is this because of Thompson? Because if it is, you should know that he's just slumming it with you. Boys like him don't end up with girls from your side of town." The library had gone completely quiet. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her desk with alarm, and the few other patrons turned to stare at the unfolding drama. Michael stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough, Richard." "Oh, look who's here to rescue his girlfriend." Richard's smile was cold. "Tell me, Thompson, what do you think your parents will say when they find out you're getting serious about a girl whose father's on disability and whose mother takes in laundry?" "I think they'll be proud that I found someone worth caring about." "Really? Because my mother had coffee with your mother yesterday, and apparently Margaret Thompson is quite concerned about your recent friendship with Claire. Something about inappropriate attachments and the importance of maintaining proper social connections." Claire went pale. "Your mother discussed me with Mrs. Thompson. Small town, Claire. People talk. And what they're saying is that you're getting ideas above your station, and that certain people are encouraging you in ways that aren't helpful to anyone involved." Michael stepped closer to Richard, anger building in his chest. "You need to leave, now. Or what? You'll fight me? That would be interesting considering I outweigh you by 40 pounds and have 3 years of varsity athletics." "Stop it!" Claire's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Both of you, just stop." She looked at Richard with eyes that could have frozen fire. "You want to know what I think, Richard? I think you're scared." "Scared? Of what?" "Of the fact that you might not be as irresistible as you think you are. That maybe, just maybe, some of us can see past the baseball trophies and the family money to the insecure little boy underneath." Richard's face flushed red. "You little... Richard Collins!" Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked like a whip across the library. "This is a public building, and I'll thank you to remember that. If you can't conduct yourself appropriately, you're welcome to leave." For a moment, the 3 teenagers stood frozen in tableau. Richard with his fists clenched, Michael ready to defend Claire regardless of the consequences, and Claire herself standing between them with the kind of quiet dignity that seemed to fill the entire room. Then Richard stepped back, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculating. "Fine, but Claire, when you're ready to stop playing games and start thinking about your real future, you know where to find me." He walked out of the library, his cleats clicking against the marble floor. Through the windows, they watched him climb into his father's Cadillac and drive away, leaving a small cloud of exhaust in the summer air. "Are you okay?" Michael asked Claire. She nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I need some air." They walked outside into the blazing afternoon heat, finding refuge under the shade of the old oak tree in front of the library. Claire sat down on the wooden bench that the Rotary Club had installed years ago, and Michael sat beside her. "He was right about one thing," she said quietly. "What?" "Your mother. She really is concerned about us, isn't she?" Michael thought about the subtle comments his mother had been making, the gentle hints about appropriate companions and future prospects. Maybe, but that doesn't make Richard right about anything else. Doesn't it, though? I mean, look at what just happened in there. Richard's never even tried to have a real conversation with me before this summer, but suddenly he's so interested in my welfare that he follows me to the library to tell me what's best for my future. Because he sees you as a threat now. A threat to what? To his assumption that he can have whatever he wants whenever he wants it. You told him no, Claire. I bet that doesn't happen to Richard Collins very often. Claire was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children play in the park across the street. Their laughter carried on the still air, a sound of innocence that seemed to belong to a simpler time. Michael. Yeah? What if he's right about your parents? What if pursuing this, whatever this is between us, just makes things harder for both of us? Michael turned to face her fully. Then we figure it out together. But we don't let Richard Collins or anyone else make our decisions for us. Even if it means disappointing people we care about? Even then. Claire looked at him for a long moment, and Michael saw something shift in her eyes, a hardening of resolve that reminded him of steel being tempered in fire. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay. Let's see what happens when two people decide to stop letting other people run their lives. She stood up and walked back toward the library entrance. I have a letter to mail. Michael watched her disappear into the building, and for the first time since the summer began, he felt like they were finally fighting for something worth winning. The confrontation with Richard had changed everything, stripping away the polite pretenses and forcing everyone to acknowledge what was really at stake. As he walked home through the heat-shimmered streets of Millfield, Michael realized that the summer of 1965 was no longer about innocent romance and lazy afternoons. It had become something much more significant, a battle for the right to choose their own futures, to love whom they wanted to love, and to dream dreams that might be bigger than the small town that had shaped them. The real test was just beginning. That evening, the Thompson family sat around their dinner table as usual, but the conversation carried an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Dr. Thompson discussed his day at the clinic while Margaret served pot roast and mashed potatoes, but Michael could feel his mother's careful attention every time Claire's name might have come up in conversation. Finally, as they were finishing dessert, Margaret's famous apple pie, she set down her coffee cup and looked at her son directly. Michael, Eleanor Collins mentioned that there was some sort of scene at the library today, something involving you and the Donovan girl and Richard. Michael met her gaze steadily. Richard was being inappropriate. Claire handled it very well. I'm sure she did. But Michael, honey, I think we need to have a conversation about expectations and futures. What kind of expectations? Dr. Thompson set down his newspaper, recognizing the serious turn in the conversation. Your mother and I have been talking, son. We're concerned that you might be getting more involved with Claire than is wise, given your different circumstances. What different circumstances? Oh, Michael. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. You know what we mean. Claire seems like a lovely girl, but you come from different worlds. Different expectations, different futures. It wouldn't be fair to either of you to let things develop too seriously. Maybe those differences don't matter as much as you think they do. They matter to the rest of the world, Dr. Thompson said quietly. And like it or not, you have to live in the rest of the world. College admissions, career prospects, social connections, these things matter, Michael. They affect the kind of life you'll be able to build. What if I want to build a different kind of life? His parents exchanged a look across the table, one of those wordless communications that long-married couples perfect over the years. What do you mean? Margaret asked. What if I don't want to go to Northwestern and study medicine? What if I want to write or travel, or just see what's out there beyond Millfield? Michael, his father said carefully, those are normal feelings for someone your age, but they're not realistic foundations for building a life. Medicine is a stable, respectable profession. You'd be able to provide well for a family, contribute to your community, build something lasting, like you have. Yes, like I have. And I've been happy, Michael. Your mother and I have built a good life here. Michael looked around the dining room where he'd eaten thousands of meals, at the family photographs on the sideboard, at his parents who had given him everything they knew how to give, and he realized that their concern came from love, even if it felt like limitation. I know you have, he said finally. But what if happiness looks different for me than it does for you? Then you'll have to decide, Margaret said softly, whether you're willing to pay the price for being different. Later that night, Michael lay in his bed listening to the familiar sounds of Millfield settling into sleep, air conditioners humming, a dog barking somewhere across town, the distant whistle of the midnight freight train. Through his open window, he could smell the night-blooming jasmine his mother had planted along the back fence, and see the faint glow of streetlights reflecting off the low clouds that promised another hot day tomorrow. For 17 years, his future had seemed as predictable as the sunrise. High school, Northwestern, medical school, a residency somewhere respectable, and eventually a return to Millfield to take over his father's practice. Marriage to someone suitable from a good family, children who would follow the same well-worn path, a life of quiet service and community respect. But now, lying in the darkness with the memory of Claire's courage at the library still fresh in his mind, that predetermined future felt less like security and more like a prison. He thought about her letter to Northwestern's journalism school, probably sitting in the mailbox at the post office right now, waiting to carry her dreams toward an uncertain but self-chosen destiny. And he wondered if he would have the courage to write his own letter, not to medical school, but to somewhere, anywhere, that would let him discover who he might become if he stopped trying to be who everyone expected him to be. The summer of 1965 was rushing toward its conclusion, and Michael Thompson was beginning to understand that some choices couldn't be postponed forever. Soon, very soon, he would have to decide not just who he wanted to love, but who he wanted to be. And that decision, he was beginning to realize, would determine everything that followed. August arrived in Millfield with the kind of oppressive heat that seemed to press the very life out of the air. The elm trees that lined Main Street hung their leaves limp and still, and even the usually bustling downtown moved at a slower pace, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Michael had been helping his father at the clinic every morning for 2 weeks, ever since their conversation about expectations and futures. The work was routine but meaningful, filing patient charts, sterilizing instruments, occasionally assisting with minor procedures, and he found himself genuinely interested in the healing process, the way Dr. Thompson's gentle hands could set a broken bone or his calm voice could soothe a frightened child. But even as he discovered this unexpected affinity for medicine, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life, following a script written before he was born. Claire had received her information packet from Northwestern's journalism school 3 days ago. She'd shown it to Michael during one of their evening walks, her eyes bright with possibility as she read aloud the course descriptions and admission requirements. The packet included application forms and a list of recommended preparatory reading that made Michael realize just how seriously she was taking this dream. "Look at this," she'd said, pointing to a course listing. "Contemporary media ethics, investigative reporting techniques, international correspondence." She'd looked up at him with wonder. Can you imagine actually studying these things? Learning from professors who've worked for real newspapers? It sounds perfect for you. The application deadline is September 15th. I'd need letters of recommendation from 3 teachers, samples of my writing, and... She'd trailed off, looking at the financial information. "And? The tuition is more than my father made in his best year at the plant. Even with a scholarship, I don't know how we could manage the living expenses." Michael had wanted to say something hopeful, something encouraging, but the numbers on the page spoke for themselves. Northwestern wasn't just academically challenging, it was financially impossible for a family like the Donovans. That had been Tuesday. By Friday, the entire dynamic in Millfield seemed to have shifted. The change started at Murphy's luncheonette, where Michael had stopped for lunch after his morning at the clinic. He was sitting at the counter, eating a grilled cheese sandwich and listening to WLS play the Supremes' "Stop in the Name of Love," when he became aware of a conversation at the table behind him. "Really think it's appropriate for someone in his position," Mrs. Collins was saying to Mrs. Patterson, their voices pitched at that particular level that was meant to be private but somehow carried perfectly. "Well, Eleanor, boys that age don't always think clearly," Mrs. Patterson replied, "but you'd hope the parents would provide some guidance." That's exactly what I told Margaret. I said, "You know how these summer infatuations can be. Better to nip it in the bud before anyone gets hurt." Michael's sandwich turned to cardboard in his mouth. And what did she say? She agreed completely. Apparently they've already had several conversations with Michael about the importance of focusing on his future. College applications, medical school preparation, there's no time for distractions. Especially not that kind of distraction. Exactly. I mean, the Donovan girl seems sweet enough, But let's be realistic about what's appropriate for someone like Michael Thompson. Michael set down his sandwich, no longer able to pretend he wasn't listening. Around him, the familiar sounds of Murphy's continued, the sizzle of the grill, the clink of silverware, Motown music from the jukebox. But it all seemed muted, as if he were hearing it through water. Of course, Richard has been such a gentleman about the whole thing, Mrs. Collins continued. He could easily have made things difficult, but instead he's been nothing but supportive. Even offered to help Claire with her college planning, though I understand her family's circumstances make that rather complicated. Michael left money on the counter and walked out into the blazing afternoon heat, his mind reeling. The conversation confirmed what he'd already suspected. His parents weren't just concerned about his relationship with Claire, they were actively working to end it. He walked aimlessly through downtown, past the familiar storefronts and tree-lined residential streets, trying to process what he'd heard. Part of him was angry at the betrayal of trust, but another part understood the logic. His parents, Mrs. Collins, even the broader community, they were all operating from a worldview that made perfect sense within its own boundaries. Social stability, economic compatibility, predictable futures. These were the values that had built Millfield, that had created the safe, prosperous world he'd grown up in. But what if those values came at the cost of individual happiness? What if the price of social stability was the sacrifice of personal dreams? He found himself standing outside the library, watching through the tall windows as Claire worked at her usual table. She was bent over a notebook, writing with the kind of intense concentration that seemed to shut out everything else around her. Even from the sidewalk, Michael could see the passion in her posture, the way her entire being was focused on whatever story she was crafting. This was who Claire was, not the quiet, bookish girl that everyone dismissed, but a writer, a dreamer, someone with stories to tell and the courage to tell them. The thought of her settling for secretarial school or marrying someone like Richard Collins just because it was expected made Michael feel physically ill. He was still standing there when Claire looked up and saw him through the window. She smiled and waved, gathering her things to come outside. "How you look like you've seen a ghost," she said as she joined him on the sidewalk. "Maybe I have. The ghost of my future." "What do you mean?" Michael told her about the conversation at Murphy's, watching her face as he repeated the words he'd overheard. Claire listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "So our parents are conspiring to keep us apart," she said finally. "It looks that way. And Richard is positioning himself as the reasonable alternative. Seems like it." Claire was quiet for a long moment, looking up and down Main Street at the town that had shaped both their lives. "You know what the really sad part is?" "What?" "They probably think they're protecting us, saving us from making mistakes they think we'll regret. Are they right?" "I don't know, Michael. Are they?" It was the question that had been haunting him for weeks. Were they naive teenagers mistaking infatuation for love? Were their dreams of different futures just adolescent rebellion against the wisdom of their elders? "There's only one way to find out," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we stop letting other people decide what's best for us and start making our own choices. Even if those choices disappoint people we love, even then." Claire studied his face with those green eyes that seemed to see everything. "What are you thinking, Michael Thompson?" "I'm thinking that if we're going to be together, really together, we need to stop apologizing for it. And if we're going to chase our dreams, we need to stop asking for permission." That sounds like a declaration of independence. Maybe it is. They walked to Riverside Park, where the pavilion sat empty in the afternoon heat, its white gazebo structure looking forlorn without the colored lights and dancing couples that had transformed it just 2 weeks earlier. They sat on a bench under an oak tree, watching the lazy current of Willow Creek carry leaves and debris toward the distant Mississippi. "I've been thinking about something," Claire said, pulling a folded letter from her purse. "I wrote this last night, but I haven't decided whether to send it." Michael took the letter, noting the return address, Northwestern University School of Journalism. "What does it say?" "Read it." He unfolded the single sheet of paper and read Claire's careful handwriting. "Dear Admissions Committee, I am writing to request consideration for early admission to your journalism program. While I understand this is unusual, my circumstances require me to begin my studies as soon as possible. I am 17 years old and will graduate from Millfield High School in May 1966. I have maintained a 4.0 grade point average throughout my academic career and have served as editor of our school newspaper for 2 years. Samples of my work are enclosed. More importantly, I am writing to tell you why I need to study journalism. I live in a small town where people's dreams are often considered less important than their obligations, where young women are expected to choose security over possibility, where questioning the established order is seen as disloyalty rather than growth. But I believe that someone needs to tell the stories of people whose voices aren't usually heard. Someone needs to ask the difficult questions that make people uncomfortable. Someone needs to shine light into the corners where truth gets hidden behind social expectations and economic necessities. I want to be that someone. I understand that early admission is competitive and that my family's financial situation may present challenges, but I am willing to work, to sacrifice, to do whatever it takes to earn the opportunity to study at your institution. I am not applying to Northwestern because I want to escape my hometown or reject the values that shaped me. I am applying because I want to honor those values by using the education you provide to serve something larger than my own comfort and security. Please consider my application. I promise you will not regret giving me this chance. Sincerely, Claire Elizabeth Donovan. Michael looked up to find Claire watching him nervously. What do you think? I think it's the most honest thing I've ever read. Honest enough to work? Claire, if they don't accept you after reading this letter, they don't deserve you. She smiled, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. My parents don't know I wrote it. They still think I'm considering secretarial school as a backup plan. When are you going to tell them? I don't know, maybe after I send it, maybe after I hear back, maybe never. You have to tell them eventually. I know. But Michael, once I mail this letter, there's no going back. It's a commitment to a future that doesn't include staying in Millfield, getting married young, living the kind of life everyone expects me to live. Is that what you want? That conventional life? No, but I'm scared of wanting something else. Why? Because what if I'm not good enough? What if I get to Chicago or New York and discover I'm just a small-town girl who was fooling herself about having talent? Michael took her hands in his, feeling the slight tremor of nervousness in her fingers. Then you'll figure it out and keep trying. But Claire, you'll never forgive yourself if you don't at least attempt it. What about us? It was the question he'd been dreading. What do you mean? I mean, if I go to Northwestern, if I pursue this dream, what happens to whatever this is between us? Michael looked across the park at the houses where his classmates lived, at the church where he'd been baptized and confirmed, at the streets where he'd learned to ride a bicycle and drive a car, and all the other milestones of a conventional American childhood. I guess that depends on whether I'm brave enough to chase my own dreams. What dreams? I don't know yet, but I know they're bigger than following in my father's footsteps just because it's expected. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to the nearest mailbox, the letter clutched in her hand. She stood there for almost a minute, looking at the blue metal box as if it were a gateway to another world. Finally, she opened the slot and dropped the letter inside. Well, she said, walking back to where Michael sat, I guess we'll see what happens now. The annual Millfield Community Barbecue was scheduled for the last Saturday in August, a tradition that brought together virtually every family in town for an afternoon of grilled hamburgers, potato salad, and the kind of forced sociability that small communities excel at. It was held at Riverside Park, with picnic tables scattered under the oak trees and a bandstand where the high school marching band would perform patriotic standards. Michael had been dreading the event for a week. After Claire's letter to Northwestern and their increasingly public defiance of community expectations, he knew that the barbecue would become a stage for confrontations that could no longer be avoided. He arrived with his parents at 2 o'clock sharp. Punctuality was one of Margaret Thompson's cardinal virtues, and immediately began helping set up tables and arrange the potluck contributions that each family had brought. The familiar rhythm of community service felt comforting, but Michael was acutely aware of the undercurrents of tension that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Michael, dear, Mrs. Patterson approached with a covered dish. Would you help me carry this potato salad to the main table? As they walked across the park, she chatted about the weather and her garden, but Michael sensed she was working up to something more significant. I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time at the library this summer, she said finally. Some. That's wonderful. Education is so important for young people. Of course, it's also important to maintain balance, not get too focused on any one thing, if you know what I mean. Michael knew exactly what she meant, and he was tired of the subtle hints and coded warnings that had been following him all summer. Mrs. Patterson, if you have something to say about Claire Donovan, I'd rather you just say it directly. The older woman looked startled by his bluntness. Oh, well, I just meant that you're at such an important time in your life, with college applications and your future to consider. Sometimes young people can get distracted by situations that might not serve their long-term interests. And you think Claire is a distraction? I think Claire is a lovely girl who deserves to find happiness with someone who can offer her the kind of security her family needs. And I think you deserve to focus on your own bright future without complications that might hold you back. Before Michael could respond, he heard his name being called from across the park. Richard Collins was approaching with his parents and Beverly Henderson, who had apparently extended her visit to Millfield through the end of summer. Thompson, just the person I was looking for. Richard's smile was friendly, but Michael had learned to read the calculation behind it. What can I do for you, Richard? Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Man to man, you might say. Mr. and Mrs. Collins exchanged a meaningful glance with Michael's parents, who had appeared beside him as if summoned by some invisible signal. Michael suddenly felt surrounded, caught in a web of adult conspiracy that he was only beginning to understand. What about? He asked. About Claire, and about what's best for everyone involved. Richard, Dr. Thompson said quietly. Maybe this isn't the best time or place. No, Dad. It's fine. Michael looked directly at Richard. What did you want to say? I wanted to say that I understand why you're attracted to her. She's pretty, she's smart, she's different from the other girls we know. But Michael, you and I both know this can't go anywhere serious. Why not? Because you're going to Northwestern in the fall and she's going to, well, wherever girls like Claire go. Community college, maybe, or straight into the workforce. Your paths are diverging, and holding on to something that has no future just hurts everyone. Maybe our paths don't have to diverge. What does that mean? Michael felt the weight of every adult eye upon him, felt the expectations and assumptions, and carefully constructed social order of Millfield pressing down like a physical force. This was the moment he'd been building toward all summer, the choice between conformity and authenticity, between other people's plans and his own uncertain dreams. It means I might not go to Northwestern. The silence that followed his words was absolute. Even the sounds of the barbecue seemed to fade, as parents and teenagers alike absorbed what he'd just said. Michael, his mother said carefully, you don't mean that. Yes, I do. I've been thinking about it for weeks. Maybe medicine isn't what I want to study. Maybe Northwestern isn't where I want to go. Then where? His father asked. I don't know yet, but I know I want to make the choice myself, not just follow the plan everyone else has made for me. Richard's laugh was sharp and incredulous. You'd throw away a guaranteed future at one of the best universities in the country. For what? To follow some girl who's chasing an impossible dream? I'd throw it away to find out who I really am when I'm not trying to be who everyone expects me to be. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard, Mrs. Collins said, her polite mask slipping for the first time Michael could remember. Your parents have sacrificed to give you opportunities most young people can only dream of, and you'd throw it all away for teenage infatuation? It's not infatuation. Then what is it? Richard demanded. It's love. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Michael had never said it before, not even to Claire, but hearing himself speak it aloud, he knew it was true. Love, Richard repeated mockingly. You think you love Claire Donovan. I know I do. Well, that's touching, really. But love doesn't pay rent, Michael. Love doesn't provide the kind of life a girl like Claire deserves. I can offer her stability, security, a future where she won't have to worry about money or social acceptance. Did she ask you to offer her anything? She doesn't have to ask. It's obvious what she needs, even if she's too proud to admit it. Or maybe, said a clear voice from behind them, she's capable of deciding for herself what she needs. Everyone turned to see Claire approaching, wearing a simple blue sundress and carrying herself with a dignity that seemed to transform the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Michael had never seen her look more beautiful or more determined. Claire, Mrs. Thompson said with strained politeness, we were just having a private conversation. About me, it seems. I think that gives me the right to participate. She moved to stand beside Michael, and he felt her hand brush against his, a small gesture of solidarity that gave him strength. Richard was just explaining to Michael what you need, Mrs. Collins said, her voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the subject. Claire looked at each of the adults in turn, then at Richard, then finally at Michael. When she spoke, her voice was calm but strong. What I need is the freedom to make my own choices and the respect to have those choices taken seriously. What I don't need is a group of people deciding my future without consulting me. And what future do you think you're choosing? Mr. Collins asked. Journalism school. Do you have any idea how difficult that field is, especially for women? How few opportunities there really are? Some, Claire replied, but I'd rather fail at something I believe in than succeed at something I don't. That's a luxury most people can't afford, Richard said. Your family's financial situation. Is my family's business, Claire cut him off sharply. Not yours, not theirs, not anyone's, but ours. But it affects the choices available to you, Mrs. Thompson said gently. And sometimes we have to be practical about our limitations. You mean I have to be practical about my limitations? I notice that no one questions Michael's right to pursue medicine or Richard's plans for business school, but somehow my dreams are impractical luxuries that I should abandon for the sake of security. Because life is different for young women, Mrs. Collins said. Whether we like it or not, you'll need someone to provide for you, to protect you. I can provide for myself. I can protect myself. And if I choose to share my life with someone, it will be because I want to, not because I need to. The heat of the August afternoon seemed to intensify around them, and Michael became aware that their raised voices had begun to attract attention from other barbecue attendees. Families at nearby picnic tables were pretending not to listen while obviously straining to hear every word. Claire, Richard said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Michael's hands clench into fists. You're being naive. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's realistic. And the reality is that Michael's going to Northwestern, you're staying in Millfield, and this summer romance you two think is so important is going to end the same way they all do. Maybe, Claire said, but that's for us to decide, not you. Fine. But when it falls apart, don't expect me to still be available as a backup plan. I wouldn't dream of it. The contempt in her voice was withering, and Michael saw Richard's face flush red with embarrassment and anger. You know what your problem is, Claire. You think you're better than this town, better than the people who've lived here their whole lives and been perfectly happy. But you're not. You're just a girl from a broken-down family who reads too many books and has ideas above her station. The words hit like physical blows, and Michael saw Claire flinch as if she'd been slapped. But before he could respond, Dr. Thompson stepped forward. That's enough, Richard. You've made your point. Have I? Because I don't think anyone's being honest here about what's really going on. And what do you think is really going on? Michael asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I think you're using Claire to rebel against your parents and your responsibilities. And I think she's using you to pretend she has options she doesn't really have. It's selfish and it's cruel, and it's going to hurt everyone involved. You're wrong. Am I? Then prove it. If this is real love, if you're really willing to sacrifice your future for her, then do it. Drop out of the pre-med program. Give up your spot at Northwestern. Show everyone how serious you are. The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Michael felt the weight of every expectation, every hope his parents had invested in him, every assumption about the proper order of his life. Michael, his father said quietly, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. But Michael knew that he did. Not to Richard, not to the gossips and social guardians of Millfield, but to himself, and to Claire, who was watching him with eyes that held both hope and fear. Actually, he said, I do. The argument at the community barbecue became the talk of Millfield within 24 hours. By Sunday morning, as the Thompson family sat in their usual pew at St. Mary's Catholic Church, Michael could feel the weight of curious and disapproving glances from every corner of the sanctuary. Father Mackenzie's homily seemed directed specifically at their situation, though he never mentioned names. He spoke about the importance of honoring one's parents, about the dangers of pride, and the wisdom of accepting God's plan for our lives rather than insisting on our own desires. Sometimes, the priest said, his voice echoing off the stone walls, what we mistake for love is really selfishness in disguise. True love considers the welfare of others, not just our own happiness. Michael felt his mother's hand squeeze his arm gently, a silent plea for him to listen and understand. But all he could think about was Claire, probably sitting in the back pew with her family, as she had every Sunday for as long as he could remember, listening to the same words and feeling the same pressure to conform, to accept, to stop dreaming of something different. After Mass, the congregation gathered on the front steps as they did every week, exchanging pleasantries and plans for the day. Michael was helping his mother organize the church bulletins when he saw Claire emerge from the sanctuary with her parents. Tom Donovan looked frailer than ever, leaning heavily on a walking cane and moving with the careful deliberation of someone in constant pain. Patricia Donovan wore a dress that had been mended so carefully that the repairs were almost invisible, and her shoes, though polished to a high shine, showed the wear of too many years. But Claire looked radiant. There was something different about her posture, her expression, a confidence that seemed to emanate from some deep inner certainty. When she saw Michael, she smiled and began walking toward him, ignoring the whispered conversations that followed her movement across the churchyard. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Good morning." "I heard about yesterday," Patricia Donovan said, approaching with obvious nervousness. "The whole town's talking about it." "I imagine they are. Claire tells me you might be reconsidering your college plans." Michael glanced at his parents, who were watching the conversation with barely concealed alarm. "I'm considering a lot of things, Mrs. Donovan." "Well," Tom Donovan spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse but determined, "I want you to know that whatever happens between you and our daughter, we don't expect you to sacrifice your future for her sake." "Dad," Claire said quietly, "we've talked about this." "No, Claire, this needs to be said." Tom looked directly at Michael, and despite his physical frailty, his gaze was steady and strong. "You're a good boy, Michael. You've been kind to Claire, and I appreciate that. But don't throw away opportunities your father's worked his whole life to give you. Not for anyone. What if those opportunities aren't what I want? Then you figure out what you do want, but you do it smart. You don't burn bridges you might need to cross later." It was the longest speech Michael had ever heard Tom Donovan make, and the wisdom in it was undeniable. But before he could respond, Richard Collins appeared beside them, accompanied by his parents and Beverly Henderson. "Morning, everyone," Richard said with forced cheerfulness. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The tension was immediately palpable. Eleanor Collins smiled her most diplomatic smile while studying Claire with the kind of calculating attention she might give to a piece of furniture she was considering buying. "Claire, dear, that's such a pretty dress. Did your mother make it?" "Yes, Mom." "Such talent. I never had the patience for sewing." The compliment felt like condescension wrapped in politeness. "Richard," Dr. Thompson said carefully, "I hope you've had time to reconsider some of the things that were said yesterday." "Actually, I have, and I owe everyone an apology." Richard's tone was perfectly contrite. "I spoke out of turn, and I said some things that were hurtful and inappropriate, especially to you, Claire." Claire nodded, but said nothing. "The truth is," Richard continued, "I was frustrated because I care about both of you, and I hate to see good people making decisions that might hurt them in the long run." "And what decisions do you think we're making?" Michael asked. "I think you're both caught up in the romance of defying expectations, of choosing love over practical considerations. And while I admire the sentiment, I worry about the consequences. Such as Michael throwing away his chance at medical school for a relationship that may not survive the pressures it's going to face, and such as Claire turning down opportunities for security and stability in favor of dreams that may never materialize." "What opportunities?" Claire asked sharply. Richard's smile was triumphant. "I'm glad you asked. Beverly's father owns a successful insurance agency in Springfield. They're looking for bright young women to train in their office, good salary, excellent benefits, and room for advancement. Beverly mentioned you specifically after hearing about your academic achievements." Beverly stepped forward with a bright smile. "It's a wonderful opportunity, Claire. You'd be working with professional people, learning valuable business skills. And Springfield has so much more to offer than a small town like this." "It sounds like a very nice position," Patricia Donovan said quickly, and Michael could hear the relief in her voice. Here was a respectable solution, a way for her daughter to better herself without venturing into the uncertain waters of higher education. The position would start in October, Richard continued, which gives you time to finish your senior year here and get properly trained. And who knows? Springfield has plenty of eligible young men who would appreciate someone with your qualities. Claire was very quiet, and Michael could see her parents exchanging hopeful glances. This was exactly the kind of practical opportunity they'd been hoping for. Respectable employment, financial independence, and the possibility of meeting someone suitable for marriage. That's very generous, Claire said finally. But I'm not interested. Claire, her mother said quietly, maybe you should think about it. I have thought about it. I've thought about it my whole life, Mom. The idea of spending 40 years in an office, typing other people's letters and answering other people's phones, making other people successful while I stay safely in the background. She looked directly at Richard. It's not the life I want. But it's a good life, Eleanor Collins said. A secure life. The kind of life that would allow you to help your family, to contribute to their stability. Michael saw the hit land. Claire's face went pale as she realized the implicit accusation that her dreams were selfish luxuries her family couldn't afford. Mrs. Collins, Tom Donovan said slowly, I appreciate the concern, but our family's finances are our own business. Of course they are. I just meant that when young people have opportunities to improve their circumstances, sometimes it benefits everyone to take a practical approach. And sometimes, Claire said, her voice gaining strength, it benefits everyone to believe that we're capable of more than just getting by. She turned to face the entire group, the Collins family, the Thompsons, her own parents, and the clusters of parishioners who had stopped pretending not to listen. I know you all think I'm being foolish, that I should be grateful for any opportunity that offers security and respectability. But I received a letter yesterday that I think you should know about. Michael's heart stopped. Claire, Northwestern University has offered me a partial scholarship to their journalism program starting in January. It's not a full ride, but combined with work study and student loans, it makes the education financially possible. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia Donovan's hand flew to her mouth, and Tom leaned more heavily on his cane. Dr. and Mrs. Thompson looked stunned, while Richard's face went through a series of expressions from disbelief to anger to something like grudging respect. That's, Margaret Thompson began, then stopped, uncertain how to continue. That's wonderful, Dr. Thompson finished firmly. Congratulations, Claire. That's a significant achievement. Thank you. When did you apply? Eleanor Collins asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. 3 weeks ago. I sent writing samples, letters of recommendation from my teachers, and a personal statement explaining why I wanted to study journalism. Without telling your parents. The disapproval was clear. I wanted to know if it was possible before I asked them to hope for something that might not happen. Tom Donovan looked at his daughter with an expression Michael had never seen before, surprise, pride, and something that might have been recognition. Northwestern University, he said slowly. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Tom, Patricia whispered. The language. The hell with language, Patty. Our daughter got into Northwestern University. Dad, Claire said, tears starting in her eyes. I know the money is complicated, and I know it means leaving home. It means you're brilliant, Tom interrupted. It means you're going to do something with your life that matters. And if we have to eat beans and rice for the next 4 years to help make it happen, then that's what we'll do. Patricia was crying openly now, and she pulled Claire into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud and so scared and so happy I don't know what to think. Michael felt his own eyes filling with tears as he watched the Donovan family embrace, their joy and fear and love, creating a circle that seemed to exclude everything else around them. Well, Richard said finally, his voice carefully controlled, I guess that changes things. Yes, Claire said, turning to face him again. It does. I suppose congratulations are in order. Thank you. I hope it works out the way you want it to. There was no malice in his voice, just a kind of weary acceptance. Michael realized that Richard Collins, for all his arrogance and manipulation, had genuinely believed he was offering Claire the best possible future available to someone in her circumstances. The scholarship changed everything, not just for Claire, but for everyone's understanding of what was possible. "What about you, Michael?" Eleanor Collins asked, and Michael could hear the subtle challenge in the question. "Does this change your plans as well?" Michael looked at Claire, radiant with happiness and possibility, then at his parents, whose expressions showed a mixture of pride in Claire's achievement and concern about its implications for their son's future. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I need to think about it." "Well," Father Mackenzie said, approaching the group with a smile, "it sounds like there's reason for celebration. A Northwestern scholarship is quite an honor." "Yes, Father," Claire said. "I can hardly believe it myself. God works in mysterious ways, my dear. Perhaps this is His way of showing you the path He has in mind for your life." As the crowd began to disperse and families headed home for Sunday dinner, Michael found himself walking beside Claire toward the parking area where the Donovans' old Ford waited. "I can't believe you didn't tell me about the scholarship," he said quietly. "I was afraid to hope for it. And I was afraid that if I told you before I heard back, it would put pressure on you to make decisions about your own future based on mine. And now I think we both have decisions to make." They stopped beside her family's car where Tom and Patricia were waiting with obvious impatience to get home and process this dramatic turn in their daughter's fortunes. "Claire," Michael said, "I need you to know something." "What?" "I love you. Not just for this summer, not just as a teenage romance, but really love you. The kind of love that wants the best for you even if it means letting you go." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Michael. More than I ever thought possible. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go. Even if it means disappointing our families, even if it means choosing uncertain futures over safe ones. Especially then." Tom Donovan called from the car. "Claire, honey, we need to get home. Your mother wants to call your aunt in Chicago with the news." Claire stood on her tiptoes and kissed Michael's cheek, the same gesture she'd made that first day at Murphy's, but waited now with deeper meaning. "We'll talk tonight," she whispered, after everyone's calmed down. Michael watched the Donovans drive away, Tom's old Ford backfiring once as they turned onto Elm Street. Around him, the last of the parishioners were dispersing, heading home to Sunday dinners and family conversations that would undoubtedly center on the morning's dramatic revelations. He walked slowly toward his parents' Buick, where Dr. and Mrs. Thompson waited with carefully neutral expressions. "Northwestern," his father said as Michael got into the back seat. "That's quite an achievement for someone from Millfield High." "Yes, it is." "It changes things," Margaret Thompson said quietly. "How so?" "Well, if Claire's going to be in Chicago studying journalism, and you're going to be in Evanston studying medicine," she trailed off, leaving the implications unstated. "We'd be in the same metropolitan area." "Technically, yes. But Michael, you have to understand. The academic pressures of pre-med, the social expectations, the kind of life you'd be building, it's very different from what Claire will be experiencing. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Dr. Thompson caught his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe I need to experience something different. Maybe I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. And if that person isn't someone who wants to be a doctor." Michael was quiet for a long moment, watching the familiar streets of Millfield pass by the window. The elm trees, the white houses with their carefully tended lawns, the small businesses that had served the community for generations. It was all so stable, so predictable, so safe. "Then I guess I'll have to disappoint you," he said finally. "Michael," his mother said, turning in her seat to face him, "you could never disappoint us by being honest about what you want. We just want to make sure you're making decisions based on your own dreams, not just following someone else's. Even if someone else is Claire, even then." That evening, as twilight settled over Millfield like a gentle benediction, Michael walked to the old railroad trestle that crossed Willow Creek on the outskirts of town. It had been their meeting place since mid-July, when the curious eyes and gossiping tongues of Main Street had made privacy impossible anywhere else. Claire was already there, sitting on the wooden planks with her feet dangling over the slow-moving water below. She'd changed from her church dress into blue jeans and a white blouse, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders in the way he loved best. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out the scholarship was just a dream," she said, as he settled beside her. "It's real. You earned it." "Did I, though? Sometimes I feel like I just got lucky. like I was in the right place at the right time with the right words. Claire, luck doesn't write essays that make admissions committees offer scholarships to small-town kids they've never heard of. Luck doesn't maintain a 4.0 GPA while working part-time at the library and taking care of family responsibilities. She leaned against his shoulder, and he could smell the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with the summer evening air. "I talked to my parents after we got home from church," she said. "Really talked for maybe the first time in my life." "How did that go?" "Better than I expected. My father. He told me things about himself I never knew. About how he'd wanted to go to college after the war, but there wasn't money, and he had to work to support his mother and younger siblings. He said he didn't want me to have the same regrets." "And your mother?" "She cried. A lot. She's scared about me leaving, about the money, about whether I'll be able to handle the academic pressure. But she's also excited, I think. She keeps talking about how smart I am, like she's just now allowing herself to believe it." Below them, the creek gurgled softly around the stone supports of the trestle, carrying the detritus of summer toward larger waters. In the distance, they could hear the evening sounds of Millfield settling into night, screen doors slamming, children being called in for baths, the faint sound of television programs drifting from open windows. "Michael," Claire said quietly, "what happens to us now?" It was the question he'd been avoiding all day, the one that made his chest tight with a combination of hope and fear. "I don't know. I want to say that nothing changes, that we'll find a way to make it work despite the distance and the different directions our lives are taking. But that might not be fair to either of us." "Why not?" "Because you're going to meet professors who challenge you in ways you've never been challenged before. You're going to meet other students who share your passion for writing, who understand your ambitions in ways that maybe I can't. You're going to discover parts of yourself that you didn't even know existed. And you think that will change how I feel about you. I think it might change how you feel about everything, and that's not necessarily bad. It's growth. It's what's supposed to happen when you step out into the world and start building your own life." Claire was quiet for a long moment, and Michael could feel her thinking, processing the implications of what he'd said. "What about you?" she asked finally. "What happens to Michael Thompson now that the summer's ending?" "I've been thinking about that. A lot. And I think I'm going to defer Northwestern for a year." Claire sat up straighter, turning to face him. "What?" "I want to travel. See some of the country, maybe work different jobs, figure out what I actually want to study instead of just following the path that's been laid out for me." "Michael, are you sure? That's a huge decision." "I know, and my parents are going to be devastated. But Claire, watching you fight for your dreams, seeing you refuse to settle for other people's definition of what's appropriate or realistic, it's made me realize that I've been sleepwalking through my own life. Where would you go?" "I don't know yet. Maybe California, maybe Colorado. Maybe I'll work on a ranch or in a national park or find some other way to learn about the world outside Millfield. And after that, I'll decide what I want to study based on what I've learned about myself. Maybe it will still be medicine. Maybe it will be something completely different." The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance a train whistle announced the approach of the 8:30 freight to Chicago. "So we're both choosing uncertainty," Claire said. "We're choosing possibility, even if it means growing apart?" Michael took her hand, intertwining their fingers the way they had during their first dance at the pavilion. "Claire, if what we have is real, if it's the kind of love that can survive and grow and become something lasting, then it will still be here after we've both figured out who we're meant to be. And if it doesn't survive, then maybe that means it wasn't as real as we thought it was. That's very mature of you. I don't feel mature. I feel terrified and excited and heartbroken and hopeful all at the same time." Claire laughed, and the sound carried across the water like music. "That sounds about right for 18-year-olds making life-changing decisions. Are we crazy? Probably, but I'd rather be crazy and authentic than sane and miserable." The train was getting closer now, its headlight visible as a distant point of light moving through the darkness. In a few minutes it would rumble past them on its way to Chicago, carrying grain and goods and the dreams of people seeking something beyond the boundaries of small-town life. "Michael?" "Yeah?" "Whatever happens, whether we stay together or grow apart, whether our dreams work out or lead us somewhere completely unexpected, I want you to know that this summer changed everything for me." "How?" It taught me that I don't have to accept other people's limitations on my life, that I can love someone deeply without losing myself in the process. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what you believe in, despite being afraid. You taught me the same things. Good. Then we've given each other something valuable, no matter what comes next. The train approached with growing thunder, its whistle piercing the summer air with a sound that spoke of journeys and departures and new horizons. As it passed beneath them, they felt the trestle shake with the power of all that movement and possibility. When the noise faded and the red caboose light disappeared around the bend toward Chicago, Claire stood up and brushed off her jeans. I should get home. My parents want to make some phone calls about financial aid, and I promised I'd help them figure out what questions to ask. Of course. They walked back toward town through the gathering darkness, past the grain elevator and the small houses where families were settling in for another peaceful evening in Millfield. But for Michael and Claire, the peace of certainty was behind them now, replaced by the electric anticipation of lives about to change direction. At the corner of Elm and 2nd Streets, where their paths diverged, they stopped for what both knew might be their last private conversation of the summer. "When do you leave for Northwestern?" Michael asked. "January 15th. Classes start the 20th. That gives us a few more months." "Yes. But Michael, I think we should spend that time getting ready to say goodbye, not pretending that we don't have to." The wisdom in her words was painful, but undeniable. They were both standing at the threshold of adulthood, ready to step into futures that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. "I'll miss you," he said simply. "I'll miss you too. But I'll also be grateful, forever, for what we shared this summer." She kissed him then, not on the cheek as she had so many times before, but full on the lips, with all the tenderness and passion and bittersweet acknowledgement of endings that their young hearts could contain. When they separated, both of their faces were wet with tears. "Goodbye, Michael Thompson. Goodbye, Claire Donovan." She walked away down Elm Street toward the small white house where her parents waited with dreams and fears and unconditional love. Michael watched until she disappeared around the corner, then turned and walked home through the familiar streets of the town that had shaped him and that he was now preparing to leave behind. September 15th, 1965. The first day of senior year at Millfield High dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn air that carried promises of change and the bittersweet knowledge that childhood was truly ending. Michael sat in his first period English class, listening to Mrs. Rodriguez explain their semester project on American literature, but his mind was elsewhere. 2 weeks ago, he had officially deferred his admission to Northwestern, a decision that had led to long, difficult conversations with his parents, guidance counselor, and half the adult population of Millfield. The reactions had been predictable: disappointment from his parents, confusion from his teachers, and barely concealed satisfaction from those who had always thought he was getting too big for his britches. But Michael felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, the freedom that comes from making an authentic choice rather than following a prescribed path. Claire sat 3 rows ahead of him, taking notes with the same careful attention she'd always brought to her studies. But there was something different about her posture, a confidence that spoke of someone who had seen beyond the horizons of Millfield and knew she belonged in the wider world. They had maintained a careful distance since that night at the railroad trestle, not out of any loss of affection, but from a mutual recognition that they needed to prepare themselves for the separations that lay ahead. It was a mature decision that felt impossibly adult and heartbreaking at the same time. Richard Collins had left for Northwestern the previous week, his departure marked by a farewell party at the country club and the kind of celebration usually reserved for returning war heroes. He had found Michael at his locker on the last day before classes started and offered a handshake that seemed to contain both apology and grudging respect. "I still think you're making a mistake," he had said, "but I admire you for making it on your own terms." "Thanks, Richard. I hope Northwestern works out the way you want it to." "It will, I'll make sure of it." It was the closest thing to a blessing they were likely to exchange, a recognition that their rivalry had been less about Claire than about different visions of what it meant to be a man in 1965 America. After school, Michael walked downtown to Murphy's Luncheonette, where he had taken a part-time job to earn money for his year of independence. The work was simple: washing dishes, taking orders, operating the register. but it felt honest in a way that academic achievements never had. Murphy himself, a second-generation Irish immigrant who had built his business on hard work and genuine care for his customers, had become an unexpected mentor. "You know," Murphy said as they cleaned the grill together after the afternoon rush, "I never went to college myself. Went straight from high school to the Navy, then came back here and opened this place with money I saved during the war. Do you ever regret it? Hell no. But that doesn't mean it's the right path for everyone. The thing is, Michael, there's no shame in taking time to figure out what you want. Better to spend a year discovering your own mind than 4 years studying something that doesn't fit your soul." That evening, Michael drove out to Riverside Park and sat on the same bench where he and Claire had shared cokes and dreams during those golden afternoons of summer. The pavilion stood empty now, its white gazebo structure looking forlorn, without the colored lights and dancing couples that had transformed it in July. He was still sitting there when Claire appeared, as he had somehow known she would. "Great minds think alike," she said, settling beside him with the easy familiarity that had never left them despite their careful distance. "How was your first day of senior year?" "Surreal. Sister Mary Catherine asked me to speak to the sophomore English class about college applications, me giving advice about higher education to other students from Millfield. You're famous now, the girl who got into Northwestern. It's strange, isn't it? How one letter can change everything, not just your own future, but how everyone sees you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the western sky. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of Millfield settling into another peaceful evening, lawnmowers running late into the dusk, children playing one last game of kick the can before being called inside, the distant whistle of the evening freight train heading toward Chicago. "Michael," Claire said quietly, "can I tell you something?" "Always. I'm scared. Not about Northwestern. Not about the academic work. I know I can handle that. But I'm scared about losing the part of myself that fell in love with you this summer." "Why would you lose that?" "Because I'm afraid that when I get to Chicago, when I'm surrounded by all those sophisticated people with their big city experiences and cosmopolitan perspectives, this small-town girl who found magic in Murphy's jukebox and thought dancing at a pavilion was the height of romance might seem naive and provincial." Michael turned to face her fully, seeing the vulnerability in her green eyes that she rarely allowed anyone to witness. "Claire, you want to know what I think?" "What?" "I think that girl is going to take Chicago by storm. Not because she's sophisticated or cosmopolitan, but because she's authentic and passionate and brave enough to dream bigger than her circumstances. The professors at Northwestern aren't going to see a naive small-town girl. They're going to see someone with genuine stories to tell and the heart to tell them honestly." "Do you really believe that?" "I believe it. Absolutely. And I believe that the experiences we shared this summer, the innocence, the wonder, the willingness to risk everything for love, those aren't things to be ashamed of or outgrow. They're the foundation of who you are, and they're going to make you a better journalist than someone who's never known what it feels like to fight for something that matters." Claire was crying now, but her tears seemed to be equal parts sadness and relief. "I love you, Michael Thompson." Not past tense, not as a summer memory, but present tense right now, sitting on this bench in September. "I love you too, Claire Donovan, and I'm going to keep loving you whether you're in Chicago or New York or anywhere else your dreams take you. Even if we don't end up together, even then. Because loving you taught me who I want to be. Someone brave enough to choose uncertainty over security. Someone honest enough to admit when he doesn't have all the answers. Someone willing to support the people he cares about, even when it means letting them go." The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a screen door slammed as someone's mother called them in for dinner. It was the sound of childhood ending, of summer giving way to autumn, of certainty dissolving into possibility. "What happens now?" Claire asked. "Now we finish senior year. You prepare for Northwestern. I prepare for whatever adventure comes next. We stay friends, we cheer each other on, and we trust that whatever happens, this summer will always be ours." The summer of 1965, the summer we learned to be brave. They walked home together through the familiar streets of Millfield, past the houses where they had grown up, past the church where they had been confirmed in faith and community, past the school where they had learned to read and write and calculate their way toward adulthood. At the corner of Elm and 2nd, they paused for what both knew might be their final goodbye as the people they had been that summer. Claire? Yes? Whatever you become, wherever you go, don't forget the girl who wrote stories in the library and dreamed of seeing her byline in a real newspaper. The world needs that girl's voice. And don't you forget the boy who was brave enough to choose his own path instead of following everyone else's plan. The world needs that kind of courage. They hugged then, holding tight to each other and to the memory of a summer when everything had seemed possible, when love had felt strong enough to overcome any obstacle, when the future had stretched before them like an unwritten story, waiting to be filled with their dreams. When they separated, both were crying, but both were also smiling. "See you around, Michael." "See you around, Claire." She walked away down Elm Street, her footsteps echoing off the quiet pavement. Michael watched until she disappeared around the corner, then turned and walked home to his own family, his own future, his own uncertain but self-chosen destiny. Above them, the September sky blazed with stars, each one a distant sun lighting worlds they had never imagined. And in Millfield, Illinois, two 18-year-olds carried the memory of perfect summer love into whatever came next, knowing that they had been changed forever by the courage to dream beyond their circumstances and the wisdom to let each other go. The summer of 1965 was over, but the people it had created were just beginning. The end. In the years that followed, Claire Donovan became one of the most respected investigative journalists of her generation, her small-town origins giving her a unique perspective on the stories that shaped America in the late 20th century. Michael Thompson spent 2 years traveling the country, working as a ranch hand in Colorado and a park ranger in California before returning to school to study environmental science. They exchanged Christmas cards for a decade, celebrating each other's achievements and milestones from a distance. They met again at their 25th high school reunion, both successful in careers they had chosen for themselves, both married to people who understood and supported their dreams. They danced once to "The Way You Look Tonight," played by the same DJ who had presided over the pavilion that magical summer night. And for those 3 minutes and 27 seconds, they were 17 and 18 again, believing in the power of love to change the world. Some summers last forever. Some love stories never really end. They just become part of who we are, written into our hearts like songs we never forget, like promises we never stop keeping, like the golden light of August evenings that live in our memory long after the seasons have changed and we have become the people we were always meant to be.